Got some rare things on sale, stranger.
That's right. We are back, and we're talking about Resident Evil 4, the remake. I feel like an unsaid thing from my end today is that I'm actually bringing a really low-key energy to the show, and that's right. It's because I stayed up until 2 a.m. beating Resident Evil 4 Remake.
You finished it?
Yeah, I finished it, yeah.
Oh, you teased me because you messaged me at like midnight like, oh, there's no way I can beat this. Chapter 13 is insane.
Yeah, it was. Chapter 13 was wild. There are 16 chapters in the game, which I didn't realize how many there were total. But when I hit chapter 13 and I knew I wasn't at the end yet, I was like, I think this is not going to happen for me, especially if the other ones are as long as this one was. But hey, I knocked it out. I finished the game. I don't know why this is a trend with me in Resident Evil games. I don't know what it is about me in Resident Evil games where like a new one comes out and I just like devour it like this. I can't not finish them.
You also you beat Village in one night too.
Yeah. Which was absurd. It was an absurd
That's a
thing
trip.
to do.
I feel like Resident Evil 4 at least kind of adheres to a similar energy. Village is all over the place. So that must have been a disorienting evening.
Yeah. I had a realization before this game came out that Resident Evil 4 getting remade for me is what a lot of people, you included, felt about Final Fantasy VII getting remade, where like the inevitability of a Final Fantasy VII remake was just kind of like on the tip of everybody's tongue for like about 10 years or more. You know, it was
longer.
I feel like everyone just kind of assumed that would happen one day, and the question was when would Square Enix finally like greenlight it and do it? And I feel like Advent Children just really like put fuel on the fire there. But with Resident Evil, it's been much more like in our face that Resident Evil 4 would get remade eventually, right? Because they remade 1 way back when, but then they remade 2 in this like kind of new updated style that like did really, really well. People really love that game. I would even argue that was like taking Resident Evil 2 and shoving it into the play style of Resident Evil 4 in a lot of ways.
Or like Biohazard too. I mean, because I feel like that was like Resident Evil 7 or Biohazard like resurrected the series and also kind of went back to the horror roots. And I feel like Resident Evil 2 Remake is a even more like horror first version of that game.
Yeah, but in terms of updating the way the game played mechanically, it feels a lot like Resident Evil 4. And then Resident Evil 3 getting remade, kind of a similar thing. And then Resident Evil 8 came out, and you and I talked about this a lot on the show, but like felt so much like a spiritual sequel to Resident Evil 4, or like a spiritual remake in a way. And it feels like now in retrospect, looking back, like the 2, 3 remake and what they did with 7 and 8 was really just all leading up to remaking 4. It almost feels like this was the end goal of everything that came before, which is obviously not the case. All these things should be taken as individual pieces of media, and they're all great in their own respect. Although I haven't played 3, I've heard mixed stuff about 3, but I feel like generally speaking, you and I talk very highly about this era of Capcom. Like Capcom is just on a completely different level than everybody else right now. Like it's just hit after hit after hit across every like major franchise they own. Like they just haven't fucked up really at all. Even the Resident Evil 3 remake, which again I've heard mixed stuff about, there are people who like really go to bat for it.
It still did well. Yeah. It just wasn't like, if it's not hailed as a all-timer, it's a lesser hit in Capcom's recent streak.
Exactly. And I think the fact that there was one that was a little bit less than like perfectly received started maybe the Resident Evil 4 remake won't be good like germ of an idea in a lot of people's heads. Like the idea that there was a hypothetical bad remake of Resident Evil 4 started to kind of spread around like a plague. But I was pretty confident, as with Square Enix and Final Fantasy VII, that you don't remake a thing this beloved and then fuck it up. You don't release it if it's bad. It feels like the easiest slam dunk of all time to not fuck this up. And I can say after finishing it now, I think it's brilliant. I think it is like, I mean, it's easily the best game I've played this year, in my opinion. It's like the one to beat for me. I also have like a huge love for the original Resident Evil 4, so I'm definitely coming at this from like a very biased perspective. But I've been looking forward to this for, I mean, as long as it's been an idea, and I could not be happier with how they pulled it off. I know you, on the other hand, were a little bit more skeptical of this existing.
Yeah, that great segue. I was not to come in as the Siskel to your Ebert here, but
no, I think this will make for a good conversation.
Yeah, I wasn't like worried. Like I figured it would be fun, but I was worried if it was going to be like interesting or what it sort of represented. Because I think even now, like when you look at a lot of the reviews for this game, there's sort of two sentiments. And obviously, I don't want to flatten everyone's response to this game, but a lot of the reviews that I've read have either said like it's perfect or it's perfect, but what's the future for this series? Where do you go from here? And that's a good question to ask. And that's sort of like, my mindset with Resident Evil 4 is that Resident Evil 4 has held up so well. And unlike 1 and 2, which are, still great to experience on their own. And I would argue that there is something enhanced with the sort of clunky controls and the PS1 look of it. But like, those are good candidates to be remade, right? Yes. Like there's a reason why I think 2 specifically, like I think there, 2's remake felt like FF7's remake, where like both of those games were classics that were limited by the hardware at the time and have now kind of taken a new form that exists alongside the original. But 4 as a game not only saved, there's weird like ebbs and flows of Resident Evil where there's like the game that resurrects the entire franchise.
Yeah.
And 4 was that. I mean, 4 took a radically different approach to the game. It was much more action focused, but still was a horror game. It still tasked you with the sort of resource management that I think adds a lot to the fun and to the suspense of Resident Evil. I think the best Resident Evil games have those distinct planning phases and then, like, okay, what do I bring with me from the item chest? How much ammo do I have? Where do I go next? And how do I do based on what I have?
Right.
And I think 4 does a great job, like making it a little bit more House of the Dead-y, for lack of a better word. But it's also like, you've got to still be smart with your ammo. Like you don't be tricked by this like arcade glowing drops of ammo and items. Like it's still not enough. And I think like in the original, eventually one of the strategies I always have in that game is like, there is a weapon that I just have to choose not to invest in.
Yes.
So if I take all of them, then I'm going to be spread way too thin. It was always the TMP. More on that later. So yeah, all this to say, like, I figured, I wasn't worried about the quality because again, Capcom has been doing so well. And I think Resident Evil 4 is such a strong base that it was going to be fun to play. But I guess just more on like a creative level, it's like, well, why are we remaking this? I think it is not as easy of a subject for a remake because again, it's held up so well and has influenced not only the series, but like games as a whole. Like again, when we talked about it last, like you can see Resident Evil 4's impact on all the Sony first party stuff, like God of War, especially. Yeah. So I was just sort of suspicious of like, what is a remake going to really bring to this? And I have not finished it. I just got to the castle, so I just finished sort of the first act of the game.
Right.
And it's really impressive. I think it is I think kind of a good comparison to make with FF7 Remake, because I think both of those remakes have this sort of mix of, there are moments that are one-to-one with the original, and it's really fun to see them under a new lens. There are other moments that are essentially the same story beat, but they're done differently. And then there are moments that are completely new.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a good enough mix that like it works really well as a remake, because again, it's not just replacing one-to-one the original. And it's also kind of showing like, not only is it kind of reminding us what made Resident Evil 4 great, but it's also kind of celebrating the games that have come out between then and now.
Yeah.
There is a lot of like, you can tell like we are playing this game post Minecraft because there's so much crafting with like the ammo and stuff. Like that was always a staple in Resident Evil, but I just think there are some things that have now entered the vocabulary of games that are entering this remake in a really clever way. Like, and them drilling down on, I think the inventory screen was one of the best additions to the franchise, because again, there's always been that planning phase, but actually essentially playing Tetris when you're planning on what you're bringing with you or what you have to leave behind was so fun. It made what would be busy work into a little game in and of itself.
Yeah.
And this game being like, well, now you can actually choose which case you have, what passive buff it gives you, and also you can unlock charms by winning games of pirate target practice that will like I have a charm of a chicken on my suitcase that makes eggs fully recover my health. These are very silly additions, but like I think it just shows kind of what an encore and what a celebration of the game this remake is.
Yeah.
And I also think they took an opportunity to sort of not like erase the mistakes of the original, but I think that they're clearly tackling some things from a different angle. So I think overall, they've done this great thing where like they upped the horror, but they kept Leon the like Kurt Russell one-liner guy, and it's perfect.
Yeah.
I think also I just recently got Ashley, and I think one of the things that has not really held up well at all with the original is just sort of the treatment of Ashley in general. Like I like her as a character, but I think there's like some pretty sexist moments in that game and just some like misogynistic undertones about how she even operates as a character.
Right.
I think that this game handles her much better. And I actually like her presence because she kind of reminds us how horrific what's happening is. Because by the time we get Ashley, we've been playing as Leon for at least like 5 hours, and hearing like a normal person's response to what's happening around us like reminds us, oh yeah, this is a nightmare.
Yeah.
This is like
it's amazing
terrifying.
how unfazed Leon is by so much of what's happening because of what he's seen since the earlier games, where, you know, he will throw a one-liner at a big horrific monster the first time he sees it, instead of being like, what the fuck is that? He's like, hey, big guy, you know?
Yeah. So I mean, all that to say,
sorry to double back. The Ashley stuff is so on point. I mean, they like totally revitalized that character, I think, because I totally agree with you. She was definitely painted with a more like almost misogynistic lens in the original, which like can't be ignored. And the over sexualization of like who is essentially a kid. It was like really fucked up, and is one of the worst pieces of the original, I think. And one of the things that doesn't hold up really at all. And in this game, she has like way more agency, even just like from a mechanic standpoint, the ability to be like, hey, stick close to me or hang further back, depending on the encounter that you're in, or like, I need you to hide in this spot for a little while this is happening, or things like that. But even on top of that, her writing and characterization is like on a completely different level than it was in the original, where you can almost feel her over the course of the game start to open up to Leon a little bit more and be more trusting of him, and less of like, this situation sucks, and more, this situation sucks, but I think Leon is actually the guy that will get me through it.
Yeah.
And they're like budding almost respect for one another over the course of the game, I think is really, really a huge plus up from the first game.
Yeah, it kind of feels more akin to like a Last of Us or like even God of War, where like it's about both of them and not just like Ashley is sort of something you have to worry about,
right?
Or tell to hide in a dumpster for
because
like 2 hours.
We've talked. I forget when we talked about this recently, but I feel like at the time that the original Resident Evil 4 came out, we were still in the era of like any game with an escort mission you just like hated. Like everyone would just like dunk on GameFAQs forums about escort missions. And then Resident Evil 4 came out and almost feels like that game was built from the ground up to be like, we know you hate escort missions, but what about this one? You know, and mostly hit the mark, I think, in the original for the most part.
I think mechanically they did a good job. It's more just like the undertones and the writing that fails.
Yeah. But then even since then, even after Resident Evil 4 kind of like proving how you can do it well, a bunch of other games still stumbled, you know, in trying to figure it out. And then you get to that like next wave of games that are like all escort missions. I feel like we're just like in escort mission heaven at this point, you know, with like the Last of Us stuff, even God of War to a certain extent, with your like second character that you have with you, who you need to like, you know, check up on and stuff. BioShock Infinite, I think, is another great example with Elizabeth. I just feel like that design problem kept coming up over and over again, even though the original kind of like got it right. But what I really appreciate is that this remake takes a lot of what worked in a lot of those other games that have done escort missions well, and it feels closer to like a Last of Us situation than anything else. So like you do need to keep an eye on Ashley. You need to make sure that she doesn't die, obviously, but like if she gets hit, she gets quote unquote incapacitated for a bit, and as long as you like protect her or like get over to her and help her up, like she'll be fine. So you're not it's not just like a one and done situation. It's not like Ashley gets hit once by a zombie and then like the game is over and you need to go to your last save. It's like you have a little bit more leeway, which I think makes the entire situation feel more tense, but also more like something you can overcome.
Yeah, I like to, like, the main mechanic with Ashley is if you tap R3 or like hit the right joystick, you can tell her to either stay close to you or like go in her own direction. And that also feels like how this situation would be handled. Like, yeah, there's actually some moments of comedy where like Leon will tell her to hide in like a dumpster or a locker, and she's like, no, like, why would I? And it's fun. Like, I think they have some restraint with being too, like winking at the original, but there are some fun moments where I think they kind of recognize like the shortcomings of the first game. Mm-hmm. All this to say, I think that this game really not proved me wrong, but I think it just showed me that this remake is a kind of strong enough to sort of warrant existing, and also doing things differently enough to feel like a new entry.
Yeah.
And in terms of like what's next, I mean, on one hand, like spiritually, I think this could be the last Resident Evil game. If we weren't in a capitalist society, like this could just be like the swan song of the entire series. I don't want that, to be clear, and that won't happen, also to be clear. But in terms of what they do next, I mean, the thing is, I would be more worried about that if we were only getting remakes, Like if Resident Evil 6 happened and then the next 3 games were 2, 3, and 4, then I would be like, all right, Capcom, like, what are you doing? But the fact that we got Biohazard and Village, and when you look at all of those games, even though 3 of them are remakes, like, they're all pretty different. Like, Biohazard feels way more like a survival horror game. Like the action part of it is not really the focus.
Yeah.
And if anything, when it gets to that, it feels less strong than the opening, where you had fewer items. That game almost feels more on the Silent Hill like chart than Resident Evil.
Yeah.
Village, I think, was a nice amuse-bouche of styles. And 4, I mean, the way this game plays and feels, and the use, I'm playing on PS5, and the use of the controller, which is nice to see, it feels perfect. It feels like one of the best shooters I've ever played. That's saying something, because I think, like, I don't know, we live in a time where Destiny 2 exists, and this remake of a GameCube game, like Resident Evil 4 still feels great. And I think like there are things that game did so well that I love that haven't really carried forward. Like the reload animations in the original 4 are so fun and so unique to each weapon. And they nailed that here. And just like even the independent shotguns feel differently.
I was going to say,
the feedback.
I think you know that they nailed the way the gunplay feels when each pistol, you could feel the difference immediately as soon as you start using it in like a really major way.
I played 4 last year, but I didn't get super far in my replay. And I don't remember, like, I do remember that there are moments where you can kind of explore and veer from the path. But this game seems to be taking like a God of War 2018 or Uncharted Lost Legacy approach at exploration, which I think is really cool. Like once you get the boat after you fight the lake monster, you can kind of just explore and go treasure hunting. And I think that openness really benefits the game. And I think, again, kind of shows like where design has gone since 2005.
Yeah, the little like blue notes that give you side quests and stuff that like totally weren't in the original game at all. And usually the side quests will be like very almost early RPG stuff, like please go kill these 5 rats, or go shoot these 5 medallions out that are like just hidden throughout the level. But some of them are like, please go extremely out of your way to go fight this mini boss that we just decided to include in this one area that you've already been to, but now you need to figure out how to double back and backtrack there and then, waste all your ammo trying to kill this thing, which is really fun. I did all of those. I did all of the side quests in my gameplay, or at least all the ones that I found. Maybe there were some I didn't see, but they were all. I mean, they all reward you with the same thing. It's like these little gems that you can use to trade with the merchant for like random stuff. But I love the incorporation of that stuff in here, because for people who are like on a more completionist bent, you can kind of have a more in-depth and longer playthrough that I feel like will be more rewarding if you give it that. But then also, because it's all completely optional, you could just whiz by it if you're trying to like get a high score by the end of the game.
Yeah, and I guess the thing that I've sort of been swayed on, and my original skepticism about this game being remade, like I think the legacy of Final Fantasy VII largely is narrative. So I think that like remaking that kind of served a clear purpose, where it's like we're going to bring this story to a modern audience, who may be put off by the PS1 of it all. But the legacy of Resident Evil 4 is largely mechanical. I mean, we love the camp and the Leon one-liners, but like, that's not the reason to remake it. Or at least I could be swayed, but that's not the reason that comes to mind.
Right.
So I'm like, if this game's legacy is the mechanical impact it had at the time, what does a remake even do?
Yeah.
Like, what does a remake do now? And again, it plays so well that I do think this remake will also have a lasting impact on game design. And I think we're also just in a time where a lot of the inspiration going forward is coming from the past. Like I think a lot of games, again, going back to Elden Ring, are looking at sort of the PS2 GameCube era and seeing like what was done there that we've kind of forgotten about. In a decade of like Skyrim influenced open world games, like what has been lost when that was sort of like the go-to model.
Yeah.
So I think that this game is going to have a really positive impact. I think it just reminds us how fun a AAA game can be, and also how fun Resident Evil can be. And what they do next, they have a lot of options to choose from. Like they could follow up, I think you could do this style, and this is where 5 and 6 went wrong. But you can do this style of action game in a new setting with new characters, and it will probably be a blast. But I also think that they've shown that they can do like very, very horror focused stuff. And in my opinion, I think the best way to follow this would to be doing something more akin to Biohazard, or what was sort of marketed in the Shadows of Rose DLC, where it's like, maybe, now that you've proven you can do action really well, maybe now have the next entry be more of a classic, you have no power horror game. I don't know. I think they've just proven that they can do all styles really well. And I'm not trying to sound like a Capcom ad. I really do think that the series has a bright future given what we've seen in recent years.
Yeah. I feel like there are already rumblings that Resident Evil 9 is in the works. So like the big question is, what is that going to be? And I imagine it'll probably be similar to 7 and 8 in terms of like its first person perspective, if I were to guess. But I'm really curious to see if they want to remake 5, given all of the weird bullshit about that game. It feels like the one that is maybe the most primed for a remake, because there's so much that needs to change to make that even like worth doing.
Yeah, but like it's also like you want there to be some kind of reverence for the original material, and I just think like 5 and 6 maybe should just be left in the past. Although we do have an interest in playing 6 eventually, but I do wonder. I mean, there are other, like, if they want to be really weird, they could be like, we're bringing back Resident Evil Survivor, baby. We're going to the spin-offs.
Yeah. Honestly, maybe. Like, one thing that's notably absent from this game is the DLC side story from the original Resident Evil 4, where you play as Ada Wong. Which is like kind of running around, and it's almost like a Lion King 1.5 situation, where it's like, you see Ada throughout the story, but you get to like play and fill in the gaps in terms of what she's actually doing while she's there.
And you have great chats with Wesker, who Wesker is maybe one of the hammiest characters in fiction, and I love whenever he shows up.
Yeah, he's incredible. And I don't know, like maybe that could be its own full game if they wanted it to be. Maybe it doesn't need to be DLC for this or something. Like they could do that if they wanted to. One note that I just wanted to bring up that I think is really important to touch on in terms of this whole conversation about like, why does this exist in the first place? And I remember, I think I said this on DLC back when they first announced that they were doing this at a Resident Evil event, but this is kind of the best case scenario for a remake also, because Capcom has been so diligent about porting the original onto everything.
Yeah.
Like this is very clearly not meant to replace the original, because if that were the case, the original would no longer exist. It's not like a Grand Theft Auto situation where they like remade them all as the trilogy and then also removed the originals off of storefronts so you can't buy them anymore. This is like, not only can you go buy the original and play it almost exactly as is on most things, but they're also even experimenting with the original. Like you can get it on the Meta Quest and play it in VR now. They obviously like had the Wii version that allowed you to like move and shoot and aim with a light gun.
This is like if they remade Skyrim. Like it's that level of like the original game is so strongly available that this is like it feels like an encore.
Yeah,
which is really fun.
That's kind of the bigger thing for me. That's like why I so don't mind that they even decided to remake this is because it's so available that like. Yeah, if in the worst case scenario, this game comes out and it sucks and it feels awful, like, cool, I'll just go play the original. It's also available on the same console that I'm playing the remake on.
Exactly. And I think we pointed this out at the time, but it's eerie how the opposite situation is true with the upcoming Silent Hill 2 remake, where there is no legal way to get Silent Hill 2. And I am very open to be proven wrong by that game. I hope it's good. I don't wish ill on it. But I'm very skeptical. Like I'm skeptical of that game's quality.
Yeah.
Because I do think that with Silent Hill 2, it does feel like that game's success is like tethered to that era. There's something about like playing that on a barely working PS2 that adds to the horror. And I wonder if you clean that up too much, if it loses a lot of its impact.
Yeah. On that note, actually, I will say there is a section of Resident Evil 4 Remake that so scary that I was playing at like, I don't know, 11 p.m. or midnight. That was like really actually like brutally scary to the point that I almost went to sleep. I was like, maybe I should just stop, but I pushed through it. But I was surprised to see that this game was so capable of leaning so hard into horror so late in the game when you have so much available to you. I don't want to say too much and spoil it, but just in terms of this game being able to kind of prove that Capcom and the Resident Evil team are like really able to do whatever they want with this franchise. Like it could be full action, it could be horror, etc. I feel like Resident Evil 8 was a really great example of that because it was almost set up like Disney World in a way, or I guess Magic Kingdom specifically, where it's like they have all of these different lands that you can go visit that are all different versions of horror. You know, there's like the full-on action experience, there's the kind of more like stealth horror experience, and then there's the just like straight up paranormal, you have absolutely nothing going for you and everything is scary stuff as well.
That section sticks with me.
Yeah, me too.
That might be the most scared I've been by a video game is that section of Resident Evil Village.
Yeah,
I remember distinctly when we first brought it up, I hadn't gotten to that section yet, so I foolishly was like, the game's like not that scary. It's like kind of more silly, and you're like, Steven, just wait. Like, yeah. And I mean, I was right up until that point and after that point, but that little like shot glass of horror was fucked up.
Yeah. And we said this at the time, but and I've already said it, but Resident Evil 8 in a lot of ways feels like kind of a spiritual successor to Resident Evil 4. Like it's kind of taking a lot of the set pieces of 4 and remixing them and turning them into their own discrete areas with their own identities, to be clear. It's not just like a ripoff of 4. It's not like they just did 4 again. But there are certain areas that like really, really harken back to things that happened in 4 in like really direct ways that are fun if you kind of know that history.
Even the Duke kind of references that he like knows the merchant.
Yes.
Which, I mean, the merchant makes a glorious return in this one, and he's somehow even better. I love the merchant in the remake.
Yeah, he's so
There's
good.
a lot more options. So like I don't know if you could do this in the original, but you can sell key items that are no longer like if you've already used them and the point you needed them, you can sell them, which I think every game should do.
Yeah.
Like, why do I have to hang on to like the used warehouse key? Just let the merchant melt it down and make something. But there are, and this, I think this is in the original, but there are a lot of treasures you find that have like slots you can put gemstones in. So there's kind of like a risk reward of like, when do you want to sell it? Like, do you want to wait to like fill it with gems and sell it for like a huge amount? Or do you just need the cash now and you're going to sell it and get like 6,000?
I think this is a good time to bring up, like, this is still a video game. And there is so much reverence for just like the arcadey nature of the original Resident Evil 4. And I think that's really, as somebody who played that game like a lot, I don't know the exact number, but it's well over like 40 times that I beat that original game.
Wow.
The interesting thing about Resident Evil in general, but I think 4 really nailed this, is like at a certain point when you start to know the game like the back of your hand, not really speedrunning it per se, but like once you really understand the ins and outs of everything, it becomes an arcade score chase game the further into it you get, which is really cool because at the end of the game, they roll credits and then they show you like, here's your score, and then they rank you as if you're like playing DDR at an arcade, like
or Pizza Tower.
Yeah.
Kinetic.
that is not lost at all in this game. In fact, in a lot of ways, I think they understand that people loved replaying 4 so much that they just added more of that to this. And a lot of that comes from things like seeing and deciding which gems you're going to insert into the key treasures you're finding, or all of the like ammo pickups you find around the ground, or, you know, tracking your accuracy at the end of every mission and things like that.
It honestly reminds me, and this maybe is a weird comparison, but because they're totally different genres, but I'm reminded of Yakuza in the sense of like a game that embraces being a video game. Yeah. And the parts of it that are especially video gamey are almost there to add levity. Mm-hmm. You know, I think that there's something about a zombie having a glowing power up on the ground, or like you're fighting this woman with a bandaged head wielding a chainsaw, and there's nothing lighthearted about this moment in time. Yeah. But the minute she goes down, she drops a big diamond, and that's almost like a breath of fresh air. Like, oh yeah, I'm playing a video game.
Yeah, exactly.
And I not to get, you know, I think you can highlight why this works without putting other games down, but I do think in, you know, recent years, a lot of the AAA games almost resent being a game. And there's been a lot of effort in like hiding the gamier parts of it.
Yeah.
Something that I really did like about the first God of War in 2018 was that like it loved being a game. And when you kill a giant dragon, it just bursts into Diablo equipment, you know? Like, I don't think every game needs to do that. Not every game's tone is met by having these arcadey elements. But I think like, and this kind of ties into what I was saying about a lot of games looking to the GameCube and PS2 era for inspiration, is like, you know, like, don't forget the strength of the medium. Like, don't forget what you can accomplish by being a game. Like, obviously, it's great to have a game that is cinematic and film-like, but I think you need to kind of play to a medium strength. And I think Resident Evil 4 does that by, I mean, you know, especially at the time, it was a cinematic game. It's not like narratively rich, but it is like a fun romp. Like, it is a fun story.
Yeah.
And I think it shows that you can have that. I mean, again, too, like the different areas almost reference different stages of horror movies, where like there's something inherently Romero about the village, and like the part of the game that I just played in the remake, that's one of my favorite moments in RE4, and kind of the moment I realized it was a masterpiece, was when you're in the cabin and you have to board up the windows and just like survive.
Yeah.
And you know, that's like proto Left 4 Dead stuff, right? That's like, it's such a fun setup for a game, and it feels so organic because the enemy's AI is reacting to what you do. So the minute you've boarded up all the windows and gone upstairs, this dude with the bullhead just smashes the window with a hammer.
Right.
And like, it really feels like you're playing through that moment in a movie.
Yeah.
But you're still playing it. You're not just watching it, which is a big distinction there.
One of the really cool things that I forgot about the original Resident Evil 4, and one of the big marketing points of that game that had totally slipped my mind until I was like halfway through this game, the like adaptive difficulty that happens in that game, which I completely forgot about. But the way that worked in the original Resident Evil 4 is that based on how well you were doing on your playthrough, the game would be more or less stringent with dropping materials from enemies and in like crates and stuff that you're busting open. So in a lot of cases, like if you're doing really well, anytime you bust open a crate that you see, it'll just be money and it won't be any ammo for anything that you have, because the game is trying to make you like strapped for resources. I think the same is true in this game as well.
It feels like it. Yeah. I actually get nervous whenever I'm like, oh, I'm doing pretty okay. I'm like,
yeah,
don't like it. You blow through your savings in a second in this game.
Yes.
Like, especially, I mean, I'm trying to make the TMP work this time, and
the TMP is the submachine gun for those of you who haven't played.
Yeah, that was my dump weapon. I just would sell all the ammo. The thing that this game does that I think is really cool is that you actually have more of a direct say in what ammo appears. One, your different suitcases can influence like the drop rate of certain things, and you are also more likely sometimes to find gunpowder and various other crafting materials, so you can actually craft the type of ammo that you need. So like, whereas in 4, you kind of got like a sampler platter of all the ammo. So by not using the TMP, I could just sell whenever I found TMP ammo. But in this game, you kind of have more of a control over what ammo is appearing and what you make.
Yeah. I think the game is also keeping track of what weapons you actually have on you and giving you ammo for that stuff or not. Because I at a certain point, I just didn't find submachine gun ammo ever again. And I'd never had the submachine gun on me, so they just didn't give it to me.
The TMP is great. I mean, obviously it's great for crowds, and it was excellent for that hiding in the house part of the game, because you're just getting flooded, so you can just, mow down a whole crowd. But it's also especially good at triggering the melee ability. So like if you kind of do a small burst, you can go and do Leon's signature roundhouse kick that is more lethal than a magnum.
Yeah.
And they'll just be down. I also
have you done a suplex yet?
I have not, but I forgot to add that this game introduced parry and stealth mechanics.
Yeah.
That I often forget are there, but they're so fun when you pull them off. And I mean, that's something that I love about the original is like, you'll see someone throw like a hatchet at you and you can shoot it out of midair. Mm-hmm. Like it's a very interactive game in that way.
Yeah.
And adding the ability to like block a chainsaw with your combat knife is so cool and gives you a little bit like, you actually are able, like, I imagine there will instantly be like knife only runs on YouTube for this game.
I'm sure.
And I actually think they've made it like a pretty viable strategy, at least in some moments. Though there is knife durability this time. So like, they actually might rule that out. But still, you have like your combat knife, which you can repair for a fee at the merchant. And then you have kitchen knives, which are just knives you find that kind of akin to, or similar to Resident Evil 2's remake, and I think Village, if you get like attacked by a zombie, you can like, if you have one on you, you can just stick a knife in their neck and escape their clutches.
Yeah.
Which is awesome. And it's cool too. Like I think having moments where they kind of cite the original, like this game clearly is very proud of what Capcom did with the original game, but I think it's like, it's fun to see, going back to sort of the trio of the different kinds of scenes that are here. It's fun to see like where they are like directly shouting out a moment. Like you get excited when you're like, oh wait, is this going to be the same scene?
Yeah.
Which I won't spoil which ones are which, and there are even some heightenings of those moments.
Yeah. There's a bit in the YouTube video I threw up about playing chapter 1 where I'm just like screaming, waiting for Leon to say the line at the end of the first chapter, which is like one of the highlights for me.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, I'm with you. Like, I think this is definitely one of the best games I've played in a long time. It's just so fun.
Yeah,
which is a silly thing to say, but it's like I can't stop playing it, and I'm having the best time. It just is great. It's a great time. That's all I have to say.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's that simple.
Sometimes it is that simple. Yeah, I'll just say I think I'm at this point where like I learned recently, thanks to somebody in the Discord who told me that if you get the original Resident Evil 4 on Steam Deck, you can use the gyroscope and essentially like bring back the Wii motion aiming.
Oh,
and I am really curious to do that and give that a shot because I haven't played through the original in eons. Like I think since my first like real obsession with it on the Wii way back when, I was like, I should probably put this down maybe forever. But I am curious to check out that Steam version because I do kind of want to compare and contrast a little bit. That having been said, I mean, I'm done with my first run and I'm absolutely about to do New Game Plus. Specifically, I kind of want to just do it as quickly as possible because it took me like, I forget, I have the screenshot on my phone. I'm not going to look it up now, but I think it was like 20 to 24-ish hours on my first playthrough because I was like really doing a lot. Like I was really just like doing everything that I could find. And I want to see how quickly I can go through it because I've seen screenshots of people finishing the game in like 4 hours or less. And I'm like,
wow,
fascinated by how that's even possible. I think you probably need to have unlocked a lot of the weapons and like upgraded them enough. The wonderful thing, if you don't know this about Resident Evil, is that when you finish any of these games, when you jump into New Game Plus, you just start with all of the equipment you had in the last run. And that includes like all the upgrades and all the money you have and all of your resources and stuff. So I jumped right before we started recording. I jumped in and tried to see if I could make it through that first like rush of villagers in that first opening bit. And I did very quickly because my pistol is upgraded enough that I have like a shitload of ammo. And also each shot takes out a villager immediately in one shot. Because, you know, the further into the game you get, the more resilient the enemies become. But those initial villagers really go down in one hit with a fully upgraded Red 9.
Yeah, I love the Red 9. They also do an interesting thing where like the original Resident Evil 4, one of the big reveals is like pretty early on, if you like get a headshot, some of the infected will have like these disturbing worm creatures within them that like you'll do a headshot, but then they get up and they have this like swerving tentacle with like blades on it, and they'll take a few more hits before they can go down. But they have like, they're really dangerous. They have insane range and they can take you out like in one hit.
Yeah.
This game builds up to those in a very interesting way, where there are some zombies that will like get back up, but their head is just crooked.
Yeah.
And you're like, is this it?
Yeah, you never
like,
know for sure. Yeah.
Are we doing this yet? And there's also a thing where you can kind of like, some enemy, you know they're dead if they drop like a power up or if they stop moving, but some will start twitching when they're on the ground, and you can run over and use one of your knives, your combat knife, to just take them out before they transform, which is really cool. It kind of reminds me of what the first Resident Evil did with the Crimson Heads, where like whenever you killed a zombie in that game, if you didn't burn the corpse or decapitate them, they would respawn as scary zombies that could run and have claws. So like there was almost that game really wanted you to avoid combat entirely, and if you did, make sure you have the right resources to take care of that before it becomes an issue. Which that's like, I think it works for that game because the game is much more of a horror focused experience. Yeah. But I think for a more action game, the idea of like, do I want to use a knife to just remove this, or do I have the ammo and like the range to take them out if they like? It's a nice decision to make in that moment.
Yeah. We're late into this segment, but I feel like we should kind of maybe answer the question for people that I'm sure is on top of a lot of people's minds if they haven't played either of these games. I do think you should start with this one. I don't think you need to have played the original to appreciate why this one is good, and I think this one is probably easier to get into than the original would be.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you like are interested in game history, like eventually check out the first one. Yeah. But I think if you're just like, if you haven't played 4, this is a great way to do it.
Yeah. There's just so much stuff that they've improved on.
Yeah, it's a little bit like the Shadow of the Colossus remake, where it's, again, I don't want one to replace the other, but it's like, this is like the way to play it, and the other one is around if you want to see like where it all began.
Yeah. The one thing I can't stop thinking about is just how good the boss fights are in this game.
Oh yeah. That was one big shortcoming of Village, was the bosses were like that dude with the airplane head was like so boring. It was like 40 minutes of like, I get it. Like, you've got an airplane head.
Yeah. Just charging back and forth. Yeah.
And in a lot of cases, the bosses sometimes reduce the horror. Like, it's like, okay, this is so silly, I don't even care anymore.
Yeah.
But like when you fight the Big Cheese in this game, like his monstrous boss form is like so gross that it's at least tense.
Yeah.
Even if they're not scary, they're exciting, and they really do utilize like there are a number of different ways you can deal with the boss.
Yeah.
Like the first boss fight, like, you know, you could use your rifle at a certain point, or you could like get good at like when they get close, you can like wait for those moments to use like a more close range weapon. It's cool. They let you approach it kind of however you want.
Yeah. And they all kind of lean on the knife, which I really appreciate too.
Yeah, the knife is like your moment. Like the weak point is open. Now you got to use the knife.
Yeah, which I really love. That boss fight that you were just alluding to, the Big Cheese. I had this realization like halfway through that fight that it was literally just the target practice game that the merchant set up, but as a boss fight.
Yeah.
Which honestly, I thought was incredible. I was like, this is maybe one of the best things they could have done for this boss.
It was so cool. Yeah. They don't call him the Big Cheese directly in this game, which was one of my major complaints. But like, I just remember in the original, like, you know, like, I think Louis calls him as a joke, like, the Big Cheese. Yeah. And then Leon, for the rest of the game, is like, I've cornered the Big Cheese. Like, as if it's like, he's like so used to everything having a code name. He's
sign,
like, Condor here, me and Baby Eagle just neutralized the Big Cheese. It's like, all right, man. I gave him sunglasses, which I'm obsessed with.
Oh, yeah.
And I got the deluxe version, so I have the like kind of Monte Cristo clothes. So that with the sunglasses is peak Leon.
Oh,
it's an incredible
That's
look.
wonderful. Yeah, I was using the bomber jacket for most of it.
Oh, nice.
Which is really fun. We were talking off the show about this, but what I love is that if Leon gets killed with a chainsaw, he respawns with like the gaping wound of the chainsaw. And then it like fades away slowly, because I think the idea is like if you get hit with stuff, like the damage is supposed to fade away. But it was so funny every time I died to a chainsaw, just spawning with like the back of this bomber jacket, which has a big skull on it, is just like covered in blood.
I'm all right. Yeah.
Yeah, the amount of joy that this game brought me the entire time, even in moments that were like frustrating or difficult or scary, I was always like grinning from ear to ear. I think that's the biggest compliment I can give this game is like all of the moments that they have reverence for from the original land the way they're supposed to, and everything that's new is usually subversive because it's replacing something that you were expecting, and they managed to do it better. And I think that
absolutely,
I think that is like the ideal remake scenario, you know?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I remember in the original, there's like they have there's one moment in the original game where you can choose between fighting a really big boss or going through like a really long, like narrow corridor full of enemies. Which is a cool choice, but I think this game actually incorporates both in a very clever way. Mm-hmm. So there's stuff like that. I mean, it's just really fun. Yeah. The hype is real. I would highly recommend it.
I think there's a version of this game too. Sorry to keep going, but I think there's a version of this game too that could have literally just been the original, but they just added some quality of life improvements, and that was kind of it. You know, like if it was more like a Mass Effect Legendary Edition situation where it was like, yeah, the graphics are better, obviously, but we've, you know, made it so you can move and shoot, and maybe like a couple things here and there we've changed. And that probably would have been fine for most people, I think, also.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was skeptical of it being.
Yeah.
Like that's because that's sort of all it really asks for when you're tasked with remaking a game like Resident Evil 4 that is such a classic, that is so timeless in a lot of ways. Like, what do you do to add to it? And I think that's what this game impresses me the most with, is like what they've added to it and what they've refined. Like it kind of feels like Evil Dead 2 in terms of like a movie sequel that just like, let's just do that again but better. Like that's kind of what we're doing here.
Yeah.
And it sounds reductive, but they did so well with it that it's really impressive.
Yeah, the thing that I think really sticks out to me is Resident Evil 4 has like maybe the best pacing in any video game ever, and I think that's why people want to replay it as much as they do, because it feels almost like getting on a theme park ride and just, you know, like enjoying it the entire time as it gets like more and more intense. I feel like the other Resident Evil games that have come since then, 5 and 6 are good examples of this, is like they've tried to recapture that magic more than once, and they haven't been able to do it. And I feel like the balancing act that 4 had was so tight that it's kind of hard to replicate. 8 gets pretty close in some cases, but that was my biggest concern, I think, about this game in general, was like revisiting Resident Evil 4, a game that has this tight of a balance and pace, and saying we're going to change some of that really worried me initially, but anything that they've changed usually ends up being for the better, which I think is really just miraculous.
Except for not saying the big cheese more
often.
Except
for not saying the big cheese, yeah.
But there is I won't spoil it, but there is some big cheese content.
There is a reference
in
that
chapter. Yeah. Well, that's all I got currently, unless you had anything else you wanted to add.
I don't think so. Not at the moment. When you finish it, we should talk about it again. I'm thinking about recording my New Game Plus run. Because I think that'd be a fun way of being like, I'm not going to show you all the cutscenes because I'm going to skip them and just try and beat the game as quickly as possible, and just see how that goes. So stay tuned for that.
That sounds awesome. I mean, with that, we did it.
Okay, yeah, let's sign off then.
Hey, thank you for listening. Into the Casted Online is your hub for everything. Places to listen to the show, and you can also review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you really like the show, you can support us on Patreon. We have some episodes coming up that we're excited about. We took a bit of a break because we just released our 3DS special. But at the start of April, we have some plans that we're excited to share. So keep an eye on that space. And that's basically it. With that, my name is Stephen Hilger. You can find me at Stephen Hilger.
I am Brendon Bigley. You can find me on the internet at Brendon Bigley.
Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Stranger.
Thank you. Not enough cash, stranger.